Hey, class, welcome to another lesson today. And we are actually moving into a new unit. Now, I hate to say that we're leaving financial literacy because that's not exactly true, but we are moving into a new unit called rates, ratios, and percents. Now, I hate to say that we're leaving a unit because all of these units and everything in seventh grade have to deal with one cohesive idea, which is called proportions and proportional reasoning. And they're all interrelated. And so there's not just financial literacy and just rates and ratios. You deal with these things in every single unit. And so we'll see a little bit of financial literacy in this unit, and we've also seen unit rates and some rates and ratios in financial literacy. So let's take a look at what we're doing today. It's called our specific subject for today is called unit rates. So let's read our objectives. The objectives for today is, and say it with me, 1, 2, 3. I will know how to represent and solve problems involving proportional relationships. The second one says, I will understand how to calculate unit rates from rates. And I will be able to explain the difference between a rate and a unit rate using content vocabulary. So let's talk about some background knowledge. So last year in sixth grade, you did a lot with ratios. And so remember that a ratio is a comparison of two quantities. For example, let's look at these students. We have 3 students with cell phones and 2 students without cell phones. The ratio of 3 to 2 can be written in many different ways. You can have 3 semicolon 2, or 3 over 2, or 3 to 2. And those are different ways that you can do it. And so now we're going to be talking about something similar, but a little bit different. We're talking about unit rates and unit price. So a rate is a special kind of ratio where the two amounts being compared have different units. For example, you may use a rate to compare 3 cups of flour to 2 teaspoons of sugar. The units, cups and teaspoons, are different, but we are still comparing them, and there is a rate going on in what we just read, 3 cups of flour to 2 teaspoons of sugar. A unit rate is a specific type of rate that has a 1 as its denominator for one of the units that are being compared. To find a unit rate, set up a ratio as a fraction and then divide the numerator by the denominator. That is one way to do it, but we are going to look at 2 different ways. So let's look at this rate that we're given. Now, the example says, let me pull out my pen. The example says, a car can travel 300 miles on 15 gallons. So we have one unit here says miles and another unit here that says gallons. So this means this is a rate because the units are different. Okay, and that's gallons of gasoline. What is the unit rate per gallon of gasoline? So per means to, they're saying per means to divide. I'm saying that this is going to mean how we're going to set it up. So in this case, we're going to do our labels or our units. And our units are going to be miles. And because it said per gallon, when I think of per, I think divide or this sign here. I'm not crossing it out. I'm putting a division sign here. And so when it says per gallon, that means that they're talking about gallons as the bottom number. So it's going to be miles over gallons. And that's exactly how they put it here. Miles first on gallons. And so we're going to go with what we're going to put down what we know. What we know is that there are 300 miles, and you can do 300 miles for 15 gallons. Now, the reason why I wrote it as a fraction is because this is a rate, which is a specific type of ratio. And as you can remember here, we can write ratios as fractions, and it's the same as these two things. So, uh, so if I want to know how much it is for 1 gallon of gasoline, so I'm gonna put this as a lowercase. 1 gallon of gasoline, all I have to do to get from here to here is to divide by the same amount, because if I divide 15 divided by 15, that'll get me 1. And these are actually equal ratios, okay? And so if I want these ratios to be equivalent, then I also have to do the same thing to the numerator, and I divide by the same amount. So if I want to figure out what how many miles are for 1 gallon, I would just take 300 and divide it by 15. Now, some of you already knew to do that, but I encourage you to use this method that I'm showing you, one, because we'll use it all year, and two, because it'll keep you from doing it the wrong way. Okay. And it'll keep you organized in how to think about this. So, I mean, you may not think that right now, but as we move on, you'll definitely see the difference. And so 15 does not go into 3, but it does go into 30, and that's 2 times. So that's going to be 30 with 0 left over. Bring down the 0, and it goes into 0 times. So this x right here, we'll actually take it out, because the answer is 20. And so when I'm writing this answering the question, what is the unit rate per gallon of gasoline? Notice how this answer turns out. I would say the unit rate is 20 miles per, or I could put per, or I can just put this sign, per gallon of gasoline. I'll just put of gas. So notice that on the left side here, I put miles, which is on top. That's on the left. And on the right side, I put gallon of gas, which is and this is on the bottom. And so whatever's on top will go first, and whatever's on the bottom will go second. So the unit rate is 20 miles per gallon of gas. Let's go on to the next one. So here we're actually working with money. Okay. And so when we're working with money and if we find a unit rate for money, it's actually called something else. It's actually called it turns into something called a unit price. Let me double check that I'm right on that. I'm pretty sure I'm right, but I like to double check things. Okay. Yes, a unit price. Okay. Let me make sure that you show the distinction here. So a unit rate for money is really called a unit price. And when I use unit rate in my daily life, I'm usually looking for what's the best cost between different types of products or different brands of products. But we're going to go into that more tomorrow. And today, I'm just going to work on finding the unit price. So the example here says Jacob pays $1.60 for 2 bottles. So notice what comes first. The money comes first for 2 bottles. And this is exactly how we're going to set it up. They tell you exactly what goes on top and what goes on the bottom. 4 bottles of water. So what is the unit price of each bottle? Well, first thing we're going to put is money over the bottles. And we're going to start with what we know. So here's our units. Okay, money, dollars over bottles. And what we know is that we paid $1.60 for 2 bottles of water. So I'm going to put B of W just to shorten it up. And I'm going to put an equal sign here because the ratio between these two needs to be the same between these two. And how we do that, how we do that is we have to do what I taught you in the beginning. So it's not very much different, but it's just called a different name, unit price. And so let's read this again. It says, what is the unit price of each bottle? Each bottle, each means 1. And so on bottles is at the bottom. So I'm going to put 1 bottle of water. B of W. So this is the number 1. And so how I go from 2 to 1 is I actually just divide by the same number. Because 2 divided by 2 will get me 1. And if I want these two ratios to stay the same, I need to divide by the same number. So in order to get this blank here, which is the amount of money it is per 1 bottle of water, I need to divide. So I'm going to take $1.60 divided by 2. Now the $1.60 is what I'm dividing, just like this 2 right here was what I was dividing. But the $1.60 is what I'm dividing, and the amount of parts I'm dividing it into is 2 because of what I did in the denominator. So does 2 go into 1? No, it does not, but I need to make sure I bring up my decimal. Does 2 go into 16? Yes, it does. It goes into it exactly 8 times. The question is, what do I do with my leftover 0? Well, the answer is not 0.8. The answer would be 0.80. Well, in this case, you could actually say 0.8. But if it was a whole number, you would want to say 80. So this would be, and that's not 0.80. We're talking about money here. So this is actually 80 cents for 1 bottle. So how I would write my answer is Jacob pays 80 cents per, you could say per, or you could do that, per 1 bottle of water. Or you could just say per bottle of water because it's the same thing. Let me know if you have any questions on that. Remember, all you need to do is divide the denominator by itself in order to get to that other denominator of 1. And let me know if that makes any sense to you or if you need any extra help, and I'd be more than willing to help you. Remember that our objectives today, as you're going through your work, try to remember these, to know how to represent and solve problems involving proportional relationships, which is we worked with our proportions, which was the equivalent fractions and ratios. And then I will understand how to calculate unit rates from rates. We did that when we went over this right here. We just divided by the denominator and we got our unit rate. And then I will be able to explain the difference between a rate and a unit rate using content vocabulary. Well, if you go over here, remember a rate was where we compare 2 different units. 2 amounts being compared have 2 different units. And so when we went over cups and flowers, that's a rate. And notice that none of these were at 1. But if I said that it was 1.5 cup per 1 teaspoon to 1 teaspoon of sugar, 1.5 cups of flour to 1 teaspoon of sugar, that would be considered a unit rate, because a unit rate is a rate that has as its denominator, has 1 as its denominator for one of the specified units.